Hey guys, so if you read the title, you're gonna see what this is about. And basically, whether you've watched Hunter x Hunter or just heard about it, you've probably come to a general conclusion, which is that almost everyone says it's fantastic. There's a reason why, people rave about it. There's a reason why people consider Togashi to be the father of shonen manga, one of the most creative mangaka out there. My problem is that generally when I watch video essays or hear someone talking about it, or anything for that matter, I hear these things so often. I hear people say something like, oh, the writing is so good, or the characters are great, but what does that really mean? My goal with this video is to really break down why Hunter x Hunter is so great and why Togashi is one of the best authors in manga history. So recently Togashi posted on Twitter with a sneak preview of a comeback for Hunter x Hunter, and this is huge news for fans. It's a manga that he started in 1998 and he's continued on and off until 2019, and there was a big hiatus after 2019. This is just big. This is really big for fans. People have been speculating that it might never come back, which I always thought was a bit ridiculous knowing his history, but in 2016 he took his first hiatus, and ever since then the series has just been on shaky ground. The author, Togashi, he's a known recluse. He doesn't make many public appearances or interviews. It's been stated that the reason for his hiatuses has been because of his mental and physical health. Another thing that's important to note is that he's said multiple times in the past that the stress of creating famous works is a huge burden for him. He's not someone who wants to be famous. He's not someone who wants a ton of money. He just wants to create what he likes, and his debilitating back problems have just been something that he's always dealt with. Something that held hope together for fans was the fact that he claimed to have trained his wife to draw in his art style and told her the story that he wants to tell for Hunter x Hunter in case he can't finish it, in case he has, in case he dies, really. That was really what he was worried about. Now, some people might think that that's a little bizarre, right? Like his wife, why wouldn't he train an apprentice or something? Well, yes, but really there's no one more qualified than his wife. She's a little known author named Naoko Takeuchi. She made this little indie project. I don't know, some of you might have heard of it. It's called Sailor Moon. I don't know. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe not. She's quite qualified, we'll just say that. So with all the backstory out of the way, let's talk about Hunter x Hunter. I'll mainly be talking about the anime, as that was the first way I experienced it, and it's a way that most of the Western audiences probably experienced it. My initial thought of the series when I heard people mention it was, wow, it looks kind of boring. It looks like a show about two kids who hunt animals. And I'll just tell you, if you haven't seen the show or read the manga, just do it. Literally click off the video right now. I don't care about views. I don't care about subscribers. I don't care about anything. I don't care about likes. Click off the video and watch the show. This is not a fun kid show. It's not a kid show at all, honestly. And it has that appearance at first. Yeah, it's dark, it's gritty, it's funny, and more than anything, it's thought-provoking. And that's one of the reasons it's so brilliant. And my God, it is just too creative. So I'm going to be breaking this video down into 4 sections and work backwards through them, leaving what I believe to be the greatest aspects of the series for last. Before all of that though, I'll walk through some special mentions and a few aspects that I think are negatives for the series and Togashi's writing style as a whole. Now, Togashi's writing style is incredibly unique in terms of entertainment. You have to realize that manga is one of the only forms of entertainment in the world that's truly time gated in this way. By that I mean that every week, or for Togashi, 2, 10, 14 weeks, whatever he wants, because he's the king, I guess. You have to release a new chapter, but for traditional mangakas, you have to release a chapter every week. For traditional authors, they have the privilege of writing a book and then going through and revising it and then releasing the book. They could even write an entire book series if they wanted and release it. They might have obligations due to their publishers and things like that, but it's not time gated in the same way. Manga doesn't really have that luxury. For that reason, manga's often riddled with plot holes and inconsistencies, but it's completely expected due to the medium, and it's often overlooked by fans when in other media might not be. Like, if there's a plot hole in an Avengers movie, people are going to be upset, but you can't really blame a mangaka when they make, let's say, 500 chapters and they're doing it every week, and it's like, come on, they're gonna let something slip through. They're going to make a mistake or change their mind on things. So with this being known, Togashi pretty much shoots himself in the foot again by being a quote-unquote gardener of a writer, as said by Brandon Sanderson. He's an ingenious writer, likely pushing to be one of the best selling fantasy authors of all time soon. If you haven't heard of him, he's a really big deal. He does like YA and adult fantasy, but the adult fantasy is a little bit more YA focused. He has a very famous lecture series on YouTube, and he talks about the fact that there's two kinds of writers. There are architects and gardeners. Architects are people who plan a story from the beginning, a more waterfall approach to writing, where they outline everything and figure it out from start to finish before they start writing. A gardener, in turn, jumps into their story and lets the story write itself. They let the characters find themselves. They create their own plots and interests, and they see where it goes. Now, obviously, life isn't black and white, but this is the general idea. There are a few incredibly famous and talented gardeners. Stephen King, for example, who will famously sit down and crank out a book in a matter of days, and it'll become a top-selling book. Togashi's like this, but also to an extreme. He very often will drop characters entirely that he finds boring. He'll drop plot lines that he thinks aren't interesting enough, or he'll just straight up change the rules to his universe if he thinks he wants to, and he's got the right to. Yeah. No, I have any more. Yeah. Some people may look at this as a weakness, but personally I look at it as a strength, and I'll get into that later. So let me drop a personal anecdote first. I wrote a fiction novel. I had an idea for a character. She was supposed to be an incredibly headstrong, ambitious, powerful young girl character. Think Arya Stark or Sakura from Naruto Shippuden, not from regular Naruto Shippuden. And once I started writing her, probably within 10 or 20 pages, she had already transformed into something unrecognizable. What I had imagined for her, it just didn't work. It didn't fit her, and I knew that it was disingenuous to write her that way. Once I was done with the book, I realized how much better of a character she was than how I'd planned her to be. She wasn't a character, she was a truly unique human with interests and motivations. This was when I realized that I'm naturally more of a gardener than an architect, even though I've always believed I was an architect. I have a theory that if you're a procrastinator and you do really well under pressure, you're probably a gardener, but you think that you're an architect. So that's a personal theory. Let me know if that's reigns true for you. Let's go to some of the weak points of the series, in my opinion. First of all, the pacing can be very rough. For example, during the Chimera Ant arc, there's long periods where not much happens. For me, I love these periods. They build up anticipation, they build intrigue, but I know a lot of people, this is a turnoff for them. And I know a lot of people who've dropped the series in the middle of the Chimera Ant arc, which is crazy to me based on how it goes, but it is what it is. You can't blame people for being disinterested. On top of that, he's known for being an infamous info dumper. Like, look at this page. Togashi loves to write you a novel, and sometimes he's a novelist and not a mangaka. So, I don't think that this is necessarily something that's a weakness, but in traditional fiction, info dumps are generally frowned upon. Though I think that the way he goes about it is a little bit more approachable, and it makes it a little bit easier to read. Though for some people, again, this is annoying, and they don't want to read a whole page of text. They want to look at pretty pictures, and that's fair. So the general thought process behind that would be, what's more interesting? Option A, where a wise character tells you how certain powers and abilities work, or option B, your protagonist finds it out for themselves through trial and error. I'd venture to guess that most people would think option B is more interesting. Another weak point of Togashi's writing in Hunter x Hunter is that he's obviously an incredibly emotional writer. His mental and physical state can dictate how certain chapters and volumes can be released, whether that's weak art, bad pacing, bad dialogue, whatever it is, it happens, and it's just the truth. This is hard to criticize him for given his history, and it's impossible to know what he's going through, especially since he's so closed off with details, but it doesn't change the fact that there are obvious drops in quality during some sections of the series, and that can be really hard for people to get past, and I get that. For example, there's a well-known meme of a roast chicken page. I'm showing it to you right now, and this roast chicken is drawn with the utmost detail, but the characters below it are just literally scribbles. This is definitely due to his physical health. It's been theorized that he likely drew the chicken a few weeks before the rest of the page and when he was healthy, and then his illness hit and he was in pain during the rest of it. That being said, when the series is at its peak, the art is nearly unrivaled. I mean, there are other top tier manga I would say are equal for sure, but there's no doubt that he's one of the most iconic artists in the manga industry. Lastly, I'd argue that his world building is actually pretty weak, and this is something I see online a lot that people say is good. I disagree. I think they are getting mixed up between the creativity of his characters and the way that they interact with the world versus the world building itself. I'll be honest, there's this big anime and manga, it's called One Piece, and I think in terms of world building, it blows Hunter x Hunter out of the water. I'm not even a big fan of One Piece. Like, I like it. I watched like 300 episodes and I dropped it, you know, which for any other series in any other like industry, people would think I'm crazy, but that's just the way it is with anime sometimes. The truth is, a lot of times the world building Hunter x Hunter is weak. I mean, for God's sake, he literally named one of his locations York New City. Dude, come on. Like, I know what you're trying to do. You want to skip time because you don't want to worry about world building this city. You just want people to know what it is innately. But like, you can't have a fictional world and then just throw in real life places and be like, yeah, it's fine, you know? Now, if you add in the Dark Continent, it gets much more interesting. But for the content that we have right now, the world building is just kind of weak. You know, he's really been working on that, and I appreciate that a lot. But for what we have, it's weak compared to other shows. It's very different from something like Avatar: The Last Airbender, which I think is an incredibly well-built world building, where each nation is unique and distinct in the world. But when you compare anything to Avatar, it's a little bit unfair. I do think that the world building for Hunter x Hunter is better than a lot of other shonen anime and manga, but probably not most. Now, you've heard all this. And if you haven't read or watched it, you might be thinking, why would I watch this? From what it sounds like, it has a lot of flaws, it has a lot of weaknesses, it doesn't sound very cohesive, and you're absolutely right. But those flaws are nothing when compared to how genius the series is. And I would like to reiterate that I don't think there's a perfect work. I think everything has flaws, and I think choosing your flaws correctly is what can make a great work into a near perfect work. So let's talk about number 4. An incredibly smooth storytelling flow. Now, this may sound surprising given some of the aspects of Togashi's writing. You might think someone with his writing style, who's so closely intertwined with his mental state, would struggle with this aspect more. That's exactly why he's such an incredible author. The arcs in Hunter x Hunter are so smooth and the transitions are so easy to follow. Not only this, but often the central protagonist of the arc will change depending on who it's focused around. During the York New City arc, Kurapika's the protagonist of the show, not our goofy friend Gon. You know, the story has more of an impact on his storyline, and Gon acts as a supporting character for Kurapika's story. I want to repeat that this is so unbelievably rare in media. The main character getting sidelined so a side character can have the spotlight, incredibly rare. Now, during the chairman election arc, Gon is basically not even in it. He is, but let's be real, he's kind of not. He's not the point of it at all. Leorio, who is probably the most throwaway side character in the series, although he's also my favorite, is pretty much the main character, along with Jean and Killua. Then, for what we know, the Dark Continent arc doesn't have Gon and Killua in it at all. They're literally not in it, for what we've seen so far. And that would be like, for reference, if you ripped Tanjiro and Nezuko out of Demon Slayer and made this story about Zenitsu and Inosuke, which sounds horrible, right? But Hunter x Hunter does it brilliantly and is better for it. In regards to the storytelling being smooth, it's pretty simple. Gon and Killua are on a mission to find Jean. To find Jean, they need to get stronger. Through trying to get stronger, they find themselves on different adventures helping friends, each other, family, strangers, to get to where they need to be. Now, this is all standard for shonen anime, but the problem with most shonen anime is that their arcs become highly dependent on the main character's abilities, the introduction of a side character, or defeating a single villain. Let's look at Naruto, for example, which is directly inspired by Hunter x Hunter, by the way. In Naruto, pre-time skip, most people segment the show into sections. Section 1 would be the Zabuza arc, Section 2 would be the Chunin exam arc, Madara fight, and Section 3 is Sasuke retrieval. Now, I'm not saying Naruto's bad. I love Naruto. But one of the difficulties is that in your head you have an obvious cutoff for each major arc. And I know I'm leaving out some storylines, but this is what most people think of, by the way. All of these arcs are based off of Naruto's abilities. In the first arc, it's him learning how to work with a team. In the Chunin exams, it's about him proving his own determination. In the retrieval arc, it's about him learning to be a leader for others. Hunter x Hunter flows so much more succinctly than that. Each arc is unique and has its own identity, but it isn't defined by arbitrary shonen constructs. The exam arc isn't some massive event which will change all the characters' views and thoughts. Now, that's not how life works. You don't go to college and become enlightened. It's ridiculous. The exam arc is a storytelling device used to teach the reader about the world and the characters. Next, the Zolik family arc happens. As a reader or watcher, you will likely not even realize that you are in a quote-unquote new arc. Rather, the story is just progressing naturally. Heaven's Arena, in turn, isn't some important thing that Gon and Killua must overcome to risk their own lives or anything. They're not trying to defeat some big bad guy. They're doing it because they just want to get better. It's the natural progression for the characters in that moment. They want to get stronger. They now know that they are weak compared to some of their peers, and it's a way for them to make money and serve the story. They progress through. They get taught Nen by Wing, which I'm going to skip entirely right now, and then they progress on to start facing actual enemies that stand a chance against them. Gon and Killua have completely different strengths and weaknesses. Gon faces someone that he's truly afraid of. This is really one of the first times that you see that, and this is a character that you would think, oh, this character would never be afraid of anyone. But this character is the antagonist of the series, depending on how you look at it. Maybe he's the protagonist. To some people, I'm sure he is. And his name is Hisoka. And I'll talk about him. I promise I'll talk about him. But the important part here is he loses. He loses to Hisoka. He gets his cheeks clapped hard. And you realize as a reader that this isn't like other shonen. The main character isn't some miraculously gifted and talented beast of nature. He's just a boy. So after Heaven's Arena, we transition to the York New City arc, which seamlessly switches protagonists and begins to show us why his storytelling flows so well. In the majority of shonen, the series follows the protagonist. Occasionally you get flashbacks of other characters, and sometimes you get a view of what the villains are doing, albeit usually it's foggy and adds ambiguity. Hunter x Hunter holds no bars and shows you exactly who the bad guys are, what they do, what their rules are, and their behavior and their goals. The Phantom Troop, the Chimera Ants, most other protagonists, they're all well defined and understood. You know their goal and their reasoning behind it. It doesn't take you out of the flow of the story. It adds to it. The story goes back to follow Gon and Killua through Greed Island, a very interesting arc where they team up with Hisoka due to having shared goals, which is also something that 99% of authors would not do. They would not have the antagonist and your protagonist team up, especially when the antagonist is a little sus. Let's be real. A little sus. He's a little sus. But then after that arc is the Chimera Ant arc. Chimera Ant arc is described by some people as the perfect anime arc. It's a story of power, humanity, self-worth, loss, respect. The most important aspect of this arc is the sense of dread that's brought on by it. As the viewer or the reader, you'll hit a certain point where the characters you know begin to struggle fighting these ants. You may think, well, if they're this strong, and the Royal Guard is supposed to be exponentially stronger, and the King is supposed to be even stronger, these are exponentially scaling characters. They are stealing the power from other characters. How are any characters in this universe going to hold up? These are some of the strongest characters in the series so far. How is anyone going to hold up? This is the genius of Hunter x Hunter at its fullest. You essentially have a villain that's hyped up to be the most powerful character in the entire series by a long shot, far stronger than any other character that we've ever seen. Kite got obliterated by Pito, and he was implied to be incredibly strong. How are our protagonists ever going to match up against these guys? The villains are exponentially scaling enemies, and for every person they defeat, they become even more powerful. This is the looming thought in the back of your head through the entire arc. Things are moving slowly, and you can't help but feel that the characters are not preparing fast enough for the inevitable defeat. The arc includes mini stories about villains and protagonists that are meaningful and interesting. They don't take away from the storyline. When I'm watching Ikalgo and Killua or Chitu and Moral fighting, I'm not thinking, this is slowing down the story. When will we get back to the main action? Although I do know some people feel this way. This is what I look forward to. On top of that, the thread is only ever classified as a Class B thread by the Hunter Association. So you have all of this on top of your head, and then you have to think you have an impossibly difficult enemy, and the Hunter Association is like, yeah, we'll deal with him. Whatever. We'll get it. Don't worry about it. He's only Class B, dude. He's not even Class A. Like, why are you guys so stressed? And he's murdering thousands of people and they're mind controlling them. So this all leads back to what becomes essentially three major players in the story. Meruem, the undefeatable mad guy. Netero, the unknown old man character. And Komugi, the wild card. Meruem and Netero face off, and it becomes very clear through flashbacks and his speech that he's actually an incredibly strong character. Now, this is not something that's super unique to shonen. There's always a strong old man in shonens, but I do feel like Netero, is a little bit different than most. It's almost implied that Netero is the strongest character on Earth. I mean, it pretty much just is said to be that way, honestly. And I won't talk too much about what happens because I want to save that for the character section. But the writing itself is very smooth and it isn't overbearing with flashbacks and info dumps. You get to the conclusion in a way that feels satisfying to the reader or viewer. During the chairman election arc, there's essentially two major stories happening. The first one is between Leorio, Jean, and Pariston, which is genius and so well written. This is the audience's first glimpse into Jean's personality. Through the meeting of the Zodiacs, he shows who he is as a person. He is cruel, he is mean, he's manipulative, he's uncaring, but he's also smart, tactical, and more than anything, he knows how to get his desired outcome. This entire section becomes a battle of wits between Pariston and Jean. They're essentially playing chess with each other while everyone else in the series is playing checkers. And Leorio is playing Go Fish, probably, let's be real. Jean sets up a scenario where his paper will get picked to decide the rules of who becomes chairman, and adds a fifth rule that he knows everyone will disagree with, which is that he should become the chairman of the election committee. He knows that they'll argue about the last point, but they'll forget about the ultimate fact that he didn't care about the last point. All he cared about was getting the first 4 points through. Now, this arc is a great way to prepare for the next arc, the Dark Continent arc, and all arcs that follow that. Throughout the election, Leorio finds himself to be an unlikely candidate. He berates Jean for being a terrible father and sends a Nen punch to Jean. Jean could have easily dodged this probably, but he chose not to, because he's a smart man. Throughout the election arc, Leorio continually makes a fool of himself, but the entire Hunter Association loves it because he's human, he's caring, he's real. Eventually, Gon is healed from his injuries, which is the second part of the arc, which I'll talk about briefly, and comes to the exam center to visit. Leorio ends up losing because Gon votes for Pariston instead because he knows that Leorio doesn't want to be the chairman. Cheadle, who was also running for chairman, talks to Pariston after and asks him how he knew he would win. Pariston claims that he knew Leorio would drop out of the running because he knew Gon would recover. The reason he knew Gon would recover is because he trusted Jean's intuition as his number one enemy. Now, Pariston is clearly one of the most evil and sadistic characters in the series, but this introduction is just the beginning of him. Now, why did I tell you all this? This was a long-winded conversation. This is where Togashi's strengths lie. He's setting up the rest of the story that he wants to tell in a way that only he can. The next arc revolves around those three characters, and likely the next arcs after that, and most viewers won't even realize that he's done that. All of this is completely throwing aside the Alika and Killua storyline that happens during this time when he tries to save his best friend. Killua and Gon's relationship is the truest of friendships. Killua's love for his sister, or brother, depending on the translation, is just as true. Killua gets hunted down by Illumi and their family servants because his goal is to get Alika to Gon to save Gon's life. It's so well paced with the back and forth between the election arc, Illumi's goals, and Killua's journey. I'm not really going to talk about the Dark Continent since that's when his most recent hiatus happened, but it's clear from what we're given that the cast has grown exponentially and it's a very complex and politically driven storyline, similar to A Song of Ice and Fire. He sets up plot lines like a small seed and waters it delicately until it grows into something beautiful. But the best part is that as a viewer, you have no idea what kind of plant it'll grow into. Number 3, a subversion of expectations. This has been kind of a cliche term to use recently in regards to media as a way to hide faults in something. People often claim, oh, this is just subverting your expectations. It's not bad. That's not true. That's not true in the same way that using a cliche doesn't necessarily make something bad. You can't have an entire series lead up to one moment, then flip it on its head at the very last moment and say it was, quote unquote, subverting your expectations. I want to make it very clear that this is not what Togashi does. To put in perspective, Togashi basically revolutionized the Shonen tournament arc in Yu Yu Hakusho. Although this is something that's been in literature since long before, probably dates back to the Colosseum, if we're being honest, but even as recently in anime, Dragon Ball is a great example. But he was the one who really brought it into the mainstream for anime and manga. When writing Hunter x Hunter, he didn't want the tournament arc to be just like every other anime. After he'd written Yu Yu Hakusho, a few other anime had done their own versions of tournament arcs. This is the general way that the tournament arc goes. It goes a mental exam, a strategy exam, a combat exam, with one winner in the end. Hunter x Hunter immediately hit you in the face with their Hunter exam, which is an exam set to weed out candidates. The biggest way that this exam differs is that instead of only one person winning, only one person loses once you get to a certain point. The exam essentially amounts to nothing in the end, which is the brilliance of it. It's setting up what the show is and will be, introduces characters, but gives you almost no semblance of their strengths or powers. It's not a power trip. It's not about the fighting. It's about the characters. You look at Jujutsu Kaisen as following this trend most recently. Jujutsu Kaisen is notorious for being based off of other anime and being heavily influenced, mostly Bleach, but also Naruto and Hunter x Hunter. Their exam or tournament arc literally ended with them playing baseball. Like, not a massive 1v1 tournament like you expected that was going to create a ton of hype. Now I know what you might be thinking. I love tournament arcs. They're my favorite arc in most anime I watch. And I agree, they're fantastic. That's why Hunter x Hunter gives you 2. Yeah, Togashi gave you 2 of them. In Heaven's Arena, they kind of said the exact same thing. A tournament arc in which Gon and Killua are trying to reach the top of the leaderboard of fighters. This tournament arc only has 3 functions though. The first one is teaching the viewers and readers about Gon and Killua's morals. Second is teaching the readers and the characters about Nen and how the world actually works. And third is teaching us about Hisoka. Hisoka is an interesting character. He's introduced as this dark, grim character, so evil that it seeps out of him and you can feel it on the back of your neck. He's akin to Orochimaru from Naruto in many ways, in which he's set up as the basic bad guy to overcome. That's not what he is at all. His motivations are the most unique of any character in almost any anime I've ever watched, maybe even media I've consumed. This is where your expectations are subverted again. He's not trying to dominate the world or be the richest man alive. He just wants to fight strong people for the thrill of it. Many characters end up subverting your expectations like this, including some of my favorites that I'll mention in the character section. Togashi loves to write characters where you expect them to act a certain way, but the truth is, that's not how people are in real life. The guy riding down the street with a motorcycle and a leather jacket might be the nicest guy you know, and the old lady down the street may be a serial killer. That's real life, and that's what he conveys with his characters. The whole story is full of moments that subvert your expectations. Initially, you may think that Gon and Killua will grow strong from their training and beat Mera. No, not even close. You might think that Gon will find the inner strength to beat Pito. No, he literally almost kills himself in vengeful anger. He pretty much becomes the villain in that moment. You may think that Leorio only cares about money because he's selfish. No, he does it because he wants to save people's lives. These are good examples of when an author uses your prior disposition and knowledge to innately force you to think a certain way. They set up moments so that when the truth is revealed, it feels satisfying to the viewers. This is one of the biggest problems with writings, especially with mysteries. If you as the reader or viewer can't reasonably come to the conclusion that the characters in the medium come to, it won't feel satisfying. An amazing example of this done well is one of my favorite movies of all time, Scream. There are hints and clues that Billy Loomis and Stu Macher are the killers throughout the entire movie, and your goal as the viewer is to figure out who the killer is. Billy gets caught with the cell phone, which only in the 90s can you get caught with a cell phone and it makes you suspicious, I guess. You're suspicious just for owning one? Whatever, we'll look past that. Stu checking the mirror to see if he has any bruises from getting punched by Sydney through the mask. Stu sets up Tatum to die. These are all examples of things that most people won't notice throughout the movie, but once they're revealed as killers, you think, of course, why didn't I think of that? That is the good feeling that writers want to convey with their audience, and this is what you get with Hunter x Hunter. Number 2, the power system and its creativity. I was honestly torn between putting this as number 1 or number 2, but I can't, in good faith, put it as number 1, which is not at all a slighting against the power system, but a compliment to the characters. Nen. Nen is the power system of Hunter x Hunter. Nen is often considered to be the best power system in anime history. I'm going to go a step further. As a bit of a fanboy, but also someone who has read a lot, who has seen many TV shows and movies, has watched a ton of anime and manga, I'm going to say, in my opinion, I think it's the best power or magic system in any form of media in history. Yes, it is really that good. I can't go into detail about the intricacies of Nen, though I would love to, but it would just take too long. I'll start off by saying Nen is the perfect power system for Hunter x Hunter, specifically in Togashi as a writer. Remember when I said Togashi's a serial gardener? and that he has trouble sticking to what he starts with, that is why Nen is genius. The way he sets up Nen essentially allows him to write any character with any ability imaginable, and it will make sense within the rule sets of Nen. This way, Togashi can write freely and allow his imagination and creativity to hit its maximum potential without really worrying about overstepping his bounds or breaking his world, which admittedly does sometimes happen. With that being said, it sounds a bit stupid, right? How is that creative or smart? He's basically allowed anything to happen, which means there's no rule set to follow. Now allow me to bring this back to Brandon Sanderson, who will be mentioned quite a few times in this section, because he is widely known as the king of magic systems in fantasy writing. It's his number one selling point as an author, and he's widely respected for it and his quote-unquote Sanderson's laws. He's generally coined as the person who popularized the idea of hard and soft magic systems in media, which is what I'll talk about first. In fiction, with any kind of magic, there's a sort of scale. On one side is soft magic systems. These are magic systems in which the rules are aloof and unexplained, unable to be captured by reasoning or logic. There are rarely any set rules on soft magic systems. On the other side, you have hard magic systems, which essentially end up being more of a science than magic. These systems have rigid rules which cannot be broken under any circumstance. Now, every magic system falls somewhere in between this line, and Brandon Sanderson has an anecdote of arguing with another famous author about which are better. So tell me, which do you believe is better? The truth is, neither is better or worse. They just have different roles within a story, and most authors fall somewhere in the middle. An example of a hard magic system would be quirks from My Hero Academia. You're born with a quirk or you aren't. Nothing changed that. Your quirk is a special power. It's that simple. An example of a soft magic system is Fairy Tail, where characters have a diverse range of abilities and powers that are not really defined by rules often. So where does Nen fall in this? Nen is interesting because it's set up to be a hard magic system with steadfast rules, typing, categories, but it functions as a soft magic system in which every character can have a unique ability and unique control over it. Now Nen splits people into 6 categories: conjuration, manipulation, emission, transmutation, enhancement, and specialization. This cannot change, and you will always be locked into your category, at least from what we know. The thing about Nen that makes it so special is that that's essentially your only limit as a Nen user. For example, Hisoka's bungee gum, which has the properties of both rubber and gum, can be used in a multitude of ways. It can be used to slow down projectiles. It can be used to catch enemies. It can be used to stick to enemies. You can use it with projectiles. You can use it for protection from electrical attacks. You can make prosthetic limbs. You can bring yourself back to life even. It's the most simple ability ever. It's just an aura that takes the properties of rubber and gum, but the application of it is what makes it brilliant. Nen is limited by the mind of the user, not the physical ability of the user. Something like Ki in Dragon Ball or Chakra in Naruto are auras in which you train to become stronger, while Nen is something you could potentially master instantly if you're smart enough. Here's a few examples of characters using Nen in really smart ways. Moral and his entire existence, Knuckles with APR, Kurapika and his chains, and even Gon with Jajanken. When Gon uses Jajanken, arguably the most simple ability in any anime ever, against Knuckles, he uses it in a way to trick Knuckles into a precarious position. It shows that even the most simple abilities in Hunter x Hunter can be used in creative ways if the character using it is smart enough. So back to Sanderson. Here's his 3 laws. Number 1, an author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. What this implies is that if an author gives the reader a thorough understanding of how the magic system works, then the reader will feel more satisfied when the characters using it solve their own problems with it. Does this sound familiar? It's exactly what I just said earlier about payoff and subverting expectations. When done poorly, this is something called a deus ex machina, which means that an outside force is written into the story to save your characters from a problem that is outside of their control. This is a key aspect to writing. Never allow your characters to be saved from a conflict by coincidence. Now, this happens in most anime, fantasy novels, and movies that you love. Remember the first Pokemon movie when the Pokemon cried so hard that Ash came back to life? Remember when Jotaro from JoJo suddenly learned how to stop time and beat Dio out of nowhere? Remember when Kirito from Sword Art Online existed. In regards to Deus Ex Machina, some people believe that Hunter x Hunter suffers from this as well, which is partly true because of one instance in the series. Netero's Rose Bomb is not a Deus Ex Machina because it could be implied that the technology could exist within the world, and in the end, it didn't even accomplish its goal. It ultimately really didn't do much. I mean, it kind of did, but really it didn't do its main goal. Now, Gon's power-up versus Pito is also not a Deus Ex Machina, because it's hinted throughout the entire series that this is a possible use of Nen, and Gon paid the ultimate price for using it. The true Deus Ex Machina of Hunter x Hunter, in my opinion, is Nanika. Now, Nanika saving Gon is really the only argument of Deus Ex Machina within the story that I can agree with, and I think that there's still an argument that it's not even that bad because the plot is setting up for Nanika-based problems in the future as a result of this. Another reason to write it off is that the series isn't completely finished, so once we learn more about the Dark Continent, it may be properly explained more. So with Sanderson's first law, when characters use Nen in creative ways, you never feel like, wow, how did they do that? You always think, wow, I never could have thought of doing that on myself, but it makes sense. That's the key factor to the creativity of Nen. When Moro uses Deep Purple to beat Chitu, it feels earned. Now the second law is that limitations are more important than powers. This one is simple in theory, but very difficult to practice. The idea is that the limitations of magic systems are far more interesting and satisfying to write around than the powers that are granted by them. Hunter x Hunter is a masterclass in this. Kurapika's chains are a perfect example of this. He makes a trade for increased power at the cost of having more extreme limitations. Nanika's ability acts the same way. Gon's power-up does as well. In Hunter x Hunter, the drawbacks to using powers are often the most interesting part of them. Chrollo's ability has such a unique and difficult set of circumstances that must be met to use it, and when they are met, it is incredibly powerful. Sanderson's third law: expand what you have before you add something new. This is something that is particularly hard for manga and anime, given the medium. It's more difficult for writers to work within their bounds and build on existing magic systems rather than to add something new. In Hunter x Hunter, Togashi still does a very good job of this. Nen Beasts are an example of building onto his existing power structure and making something new out of it. This law is less of a rule and more of a suggestion for writers to follow. Basically, the idea is fully flesh out your magic system instead of adding more magic systems later. There are some examples of magic systems that are added on, like the Dark Continent, for example, but for the most part, Nen is only ever expanded as a power system, not added to. Now, it's no question that Nen is a complex power system. Togashi gave his readers essays worth of information about it, but the reason he did that is to create a more fulfilling, satisfying, and believable experience for his readers in the future when he drills in your head the specifics of the power system. Think about this. If Nen wasn't so allowable, would there ever have been a power like Knuckles' APR? APR is essentially an accounting principle turned into an anime ability. It's so unbelievably unique and would never be possible in an anime with a more basic power system. Here we are, number 1, the characters and morals. Alright, we're here, and you're probably thinking, I claim that Nen is the best magic system of all time, and I put characters over that. Now, how can I possibly explain that? Poorly is the answer, but I'm going to try my best. Most shonen anime follow a very simple system of growth. The character tries something, fails, character trains and learns from his mistakes, he tries again and succeeds, story resets, repeat. I don't even need to go through examples of this because it's pretty obvious. Almost every story does this. Star Wars, anime, dramas, folktales, everything. Togashi makes an effort in Hunter x Hunter to avoid these tropes. All of his 4 main characters take different paths within the story. Just think about it. Gon consistently loses to the strongest characters in the series: Hisoka, Illumi, Knuckles. Killua starts out incredibly strong but has to overcome the hold that his family has over his mind. Kurapika sacrifices his mental state and body for the sake of revenge. Leorio does a complete 180 in the story and completely leaves to become a doctor. These are real stories. Not everyone is the chosen one. So in regards to a base level, Togashi fights obvious patterns and cliches of character growth and development. All of the characters in Hunter x Hunter have multiple notes to them. They're human. They make mistakes. Gon is the poster boy of this series. He's the Goku, he's the Naruto, he's the Deku. But even he succumbs to human emotions of resentment and hatred. He makes mistakes, and that is what makes him brilliant. Deku is an unbelievably righteous and good person throughout My Hero Academia, but it's impossible to relate to him as a person because no one acts that way in real life. I think for his story, he's an okay character though. Gon, on the other hand, is relatable. When Kite dies, Gon loses his mind. He loses his sanity and essentially trades his life for power just to kill Pito. You can see the effect it has on Killua, his best friend, and it is incredibly powerful. Then on the opposite side, you have Hisoka, one of the most creative villains ever written, in my opinion. This is a person whose only goal is to fight people who are strong. He lives for the sussy thrill of a strong opponent and Gon and Killua's butts, but let's not worry about that right now. He's set up to be this overshadowing figure to the main characters that they must overcome, but quickly he becomes less of an obstacle and more of an ally to them. He doesn't want to take over the world. He doesn't want to become the richest person on Earth. He just wants to battle strong people because it makes him, a little excited. And that's literally the most human motivation of all. That is humanity. The villains in the series are top tier villains for any media, rivaling some of the greatest anime villains without a doubt. It wouldn't be a Hunter x Hunter video if we didn't talk about Cell. Meruem. Well, let's be real for a second. It's pretty obvious that Meruem's inspired by Cell, but I think the way his arc is handled gives plenty of credibility. The entirety of the Chimera arc is a commentary on humanity. It's a commentary on what it means to be a human and the way humans treat the world around them. Imagine if a species came to your world, enslaved, killed, and ruined your world because they were more powerful than you. Does this remind you of anything? But that's really just the simple thought experiment that Togashi wants to put you through. Throughout the Chimera Ants arc, the ants continually gain more and more humanity the less attached to their ant DNA they become and more attached to human DNA. They start out as brainless soldiers for the queen, but by the end of it, many ants gain full sentience and even humanity. Completely discounting the massive presence that the birth of Meruem has on the series, his character is really, really fascinating. His goal is to learn as much as he can about the people he will rule over, so he starts playing games with the best minds in the world. Chess, Go, whatever it is, he always wins until he comes across a cute girl named Komugi, the world champion Gungi player. Meruem grows to respect the blind, dim-witted girl, learning that the only thing she has in her entire life is Gungi. Meruem, someone who believed himself to be the born king to rule the entire world, finds himself becoming even more and more human. Eventually, this all culminates with a fight between Netero and Meruem. At the beginning of the fight, as a viewer, you're meant to believe that Meruem is this evil invader and Netero is the last hope for humanity. But what happens is throughout the fight, the viewer slowly realizes that the one who's lost their humanity is Netero, and the one who's gained their humanity is Meruem. Meruem offers to keep all humans alive when he takes over, but Netero will not allow it. The fight is absolutely enthralling. It shows that the Chimera Ants can actually be more humane than even humans themselves, and that the decisions in your life are the only things that matter, not how you were born. This is then expanded on by the aftermath when Meruem's last wishes are to find Komugi and be with her in his final moments. It is heart-wrenching and beautiful, especially since Komugi was essentially an outcast to her own species, but Meruem loved her for who she was. In some ways, Meruem ended up becoming the most humane and kind person of all for giving her a chance when no one else did. Next, we'll talk about what I think is the absolute best part of the entire series, the side characters. I'll be talking about two in particular, but I'll be honest, almost every single side character is amazingly written, interesting, and fun to follow. First of all, let's talk about Knuckles. When Knuckles first comes to screen, every single person has the exact same reaction. Oh, I know who this character will be. He's gonna be the dumb jock who's only good at hand-to-hand combat. His appearance is supposed to portray a Japanese Yankee, which is a caricature of like a bad boy, and he is portrayed that way at first. But then you get a glimpse into who he is when he gets caught feeding stray dogs. Remember the section about subverting expectation? He ends up being one of the most kind-hearted people, as well as being an incredibly adept and smart fighter. APR is the exact opposite Hatsu that you would expect a character like Knuckles to have, and he uses it perfectly. This is the definition of good writing. He's likable, competent, driven, and every time he comes on screen, he's a joy to see. Now, a great character that I think is very similar is Todo from Jujutsu Kaisen, which I've already mentioned is a lot of times inspired by Hunter x Hunter. He's really presented the same way, though even meaner. But once you get to know him and see him interact with Itadori, it becomes so clear that he's anything but that. And the last character I'll talk about is Ikalgo. Yes, the brilliant little squid character that in any other anime would have gotten, 3 minutes of screen time max. Yet he had multiple episodes essentially dedicated to him during the most heavy and brutal arc in the entire series. Ikalgo and Killua's unlikely friendship is so easy to watch. His backstory is brutal and sad, and his growth within humanity and understanding of who he truly is again is a masterclass in character writing. There's honestly so much I could say about his story, but I can't get to it all. I just love that he has more character growth in about 5 episodes of screen time than some characters in other shows get throughout the entire series. I genuinely think that Ikalgo could have had a spin-off series of 12 to 20 episodes about just him, and it would be considered an amazing series. That's how you know a character is well written, and he's just a throwaway side character. Shout out to all the Royal Guard too, Nov, most of the Phantom Troop members, Illumi, the rest of the Zoldycks, Palm, Kurapika, Leorio, Alaka, and the rest of the fantastic characters in the show. So those are the reasons why I think Hunter x Hunter is well written. I hope that this really gave you a good idea of, my thought process as a writer when it comes to what is good writing. I really hope this is interesting to you. If you want, you can like and subscribe. It really would help a lot. Also, comment if there's any other anime that you want me to cover, or series in general, or Hunter x Hunter videos, or whatever. Just let me know your takes, whatever it is. I want to hear what you have to say. Actually, I'd love to make another video. I had a lot of fun doing this, even though it was a ton of work. And if there's, even a live action TV series or another anime or other Hunter x Hunter topics that you want me to talk about, I'd be happy to. This is all just my opinion. Keep that in mind. I know I'm not perfect, and I love to learn from others. So other than that, thanks for watching.